Welcome back for another deep dive. And today we're going to get into something really interesting. I think a little horrifying, but really fascinating at the same time.
Definitely.
We're going to be talking about the Bal des Ardents, or the Burning Men's Ball.
It's one of those events where you kind of can't look away, even though it's really awful what happened.
Yeah, and it happened in 1393 in France, and it says a lot about the anxieties and, frankly, the excesses of power in late medieval Europe.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So before we get into the actual event, let's set the stage.
Okay.
The year is 1393. Charles VI is on the French throne, and he's known for his...
Unpredictable behavior, let's just say that.
Yeah, putting it lightly, he had suffered a pretty major mental breakdown the year prior, and it threw the court into turmoil.
Yeah, definitely raised major concerns about his ability to rule.
Yeah.
So, not a great time for stability in France.
So how does the royal court deal with that uncertainty? Extravagant parties.
Of course.
And that brings us to the Bal des Ardents, hosted by the Queen Isabeau of Bavaria.
Right, and keep in mind that this party was to celebrate a remarriage, which was a pretty big deal back then.
Really? Why?
Yeah, it was often met with a lot of suspicion, mockery even. People would stage these rituals called charivari, think like public roasting, disguises, noise, chaos, all to kind of poke fun at the couple.
Oh, wow. So they were already kind of primed for things to go a little sideways at this party.
Yeah, you could say that. And it gave people a way to police social norms, often with a good dose of public humiliation.
So into this already interesting atmosphere, a group of 6 noblemen decided to perform a dance. And remembering what you just said about the charivari, these noblemen decided to dress up as what were called wild men.
Exactly, and it's important to know what those were seen as.
Yeah, what were they?
Well, they were almost mythical figures. They were hairy, uncivilized, demonic even in some representations.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and these figures kind of embodied like the raw, untamed forces that were lurking underneath the surface of society.
Yeah, so these noblemen are really pushing the boundaries of acceptable entertainment at this point.
For sure. And the way they dressed was intense. Like, imagine linen costumes that were completely soaked in resin and then covered in flax to get that wild, unkempt look.
Okay, that sounds incredibly flammable even today, let alone in a room full of candles and torches.
Oh yeah, very much so. And to make things even more interesting, the king himself decided to join in on the fun.
No way. In disguise, of course.
Yeah, in disguise, which, given his mental state, adds a whole other level of complexity, don't you think?
Okay, so we've got the King of France dressed up as a wild man about to dance at this party. And, oh yeah, his costume's covered in resin and flax.
Right, what could go wrong? Well, a lot, apparently, because from what we can gather from eyewitness accounts, the dance itself was, well, it wasn't exactly a waltz, so let's just say that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, more like a, I don't know, like a frenzied spectacle. These guys were masked and covered in flax, stomping around, howling. Some chronicles even describe their behavior as diabolical.
Wow, they were really going for it, huh? But all that resin and flax, it's making me nervous just thinking about it.
As it should, because just as the performance was reaching its peak, in walks the king's brother, the Duke of Orleans, with a retinue of torchbearers.
Oh no, that's not good.
It's not. The Duke, well, let's just say he was known to enjoy a good spectacle. Maybe he had a few too many glasses of wine that night.
And he just ignored those strict no open flames rules.
Completely. I mean, just breathtaking recklessness. And of course, what happens? Disaster.
I think I can imagine. Sparks fly, flames erupt.
It was pandemonium, complete chaos. I mean, the flax on the costumes just ignited instantly, engulfed the dancers in flames.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and you can imagine the terror. People screaming, these men are trapped in these burning costumes. What had started as revelry just descended into absolute panic.
And the king, he was right there in the middle of it all. What happened to him?
That's where the Duchess of Berry comes in, the king's aunt. She was standing nearby and saw what happened, saw her nephew was about to be engulfed in flames, and just reacted so quickly.
What does she do?
She threw herself over Charles, used her skirts, her large, voluminous skirts, to shield him from the fire.
Wow, talk about a life-saving wardrobe malfunction.
Right. But sadly, not everyone was so lucky.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. How many people died?
4 of the noblemen died that night, including, ironically, the one who had come up with the idea for the wild man dance in the first place.
Oh, wow. What about the Duke? What happened to him?
He actually, physically, he was fine, walked away from the fire, but his reputation, that was another matter. This was a guy who already had a reputation. There were rumors about sorcery and dark magic swirling around him, and this just made everything so much worse.
People must have been furious. Were they accusing him of starting the fire on purpose?
Absolutely. Some people even whispered that he had planned the whole thing, that this was all a deliberate attempt to harm the king.
Oh, wow.
Now, whether or not that's true is debatable, but it definitely didn't do him any favors. Cast a really dark shadow over him and threw even more fuel on the fire of an already unstable and suspicious court.
It's amazing how this one event, as tragic as it was, became such a huge scandal. I mean, we're still talking about it today.
It really is. It speaks to how precarious everything was back then,
Right.
and how one misstep, especially in such a public way, could have huge ripple effects.
I mean, talk about a public relations nightmare. A king almost burning to death at his own party.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine how they could come back from that.
Oh, it was a disaster, a complete disaster.
Yeah.
The aftermath was just, people were furious. They saw it as, I don't know, the perfect example of everything wrong with the ruling class.
Right.
The extravagance, the carelessness, how out of touch they were with everyday life. It all just blew up in their faces.
And remember, this is at a time when people were already really on edge. I mean, the king's mental state is in question. There are rumors of plots and conspiracies everywhere. And then you have this very literal, fiery spectacle.
That's almost too perfect, isn't it?
Right.
Like a kingdom going up in flames.
Exactly. And people were definitely making those connections, right? Like the wild men costumes, they took on a whole new meaning after the fire.
Totally.
Yeah.
Before the fire, they were just part of this weird performance. But afterwards, it was like they represented the chaos, the instability of the whole court.
So this one event, as tragic and strange as it was, it really captured people's anxieties about their leaders, about the future.
It definitely exposed just how fragile power really is, how quickly things can descend into chaos, even in what should be a controlled environment.
It makes you wonder, what can we learn from all of this? It's more than just don't play with fire.
Right, there's more to it than that.
Yeah.
I think the Bal des Ardents, as unique as it was, it also speaks to something that's always present. This idea that underneath what we think of as order, there's always the potential for things to fall apart.
That's a sobering thought. Those wild men caught in their own costumes, it really makes you think about how easily things can go from celebration to disaster.
It does, and it reminds us to be careful, to think about the choices we make. Because even when things seem fine, there's always the potential for things to go wrong.
That's a great point to end on, so I guess we'll put out the torches for now, but hopefully this got everyone thinking.
Yeah, definitely. And who knows, maybe there are other events that seem strange on the surface but can actually tell us a lot about ourselves, about being human.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive, and we'll see you next time.